The first thing we're going to kick off with is the clarity of promotion pathways. Now, this is something which starts to dawn on us as early career academics in our second, third year of being in the job, whereby we're looking to see how we can not so much fast track our career into becoming a senior lecturer, but to at least know what are the skills and experiences that we need to be picking up along the way. I think one of the main things, and this harkens back to one of our previous podcasts in terms of mental well-being and trying to not overburden ourselves as early career academics, we don't always know what boxes we need to tick. And because of that, we start to do everything we can in terms of research, wider scholarship, teaching, training, consultancy. And just because we want to have all of those skills in place when we do apply for our senior lectureship and hopefully further down the line, our associate professorship. So, Craig, what are your experiences in terms of you being able to navigate these promotional pathways?
There's been a few really. So as you know, and as listeners might know, I've recently gone through the kind of promotion process, and I've recently been kind of promoted to associate professor. So kind of I know kind of roughly what is being looked for in these kind of searches for promotion. My experience tells me that things like research output is important. Things like grant capture, so bringing in research funding, is important. Trying to develop a sense of impact. So how is your work being used in different areas, different sectors? Is it changing policy in different places? But equally, what's the experience that you're giving students as well in terms of your teaching philosophy, any courses you've developed, any module evaluations that you've had? And we know that there are huge issues with things like module evaluations and teaching evaluations, but these seem to be the things that are kind of highly weighted when it comes to making these kinds of decisions. And I realize that feels like everything about the job. So it's teaching, it's research, it's grant income, it's impact. So yeah, there's lots of things that seem to be playing into that kind of promotion process. But equally, I think some of the stuff that we've discussed in previous episodes is kind of thinking about how do we streamline some of the processes that we have to make sure that you can get good research output alongside good teaching experiences for students. Can you get students involved with different things to give you pilot data that you can use for a grant application that they might be on as well? So there's different things that you can do, I guess, to kind of bring these things all together.
Perfect. And then I think just kind of on top of that, and to encompass everything, we need to make sure that when you're going under kind of supervision and training to take on these higher roles, that the people who are in charge of mentoring you are being as open and transparent as possible to tell you, okay, so in terms of your portfolio, this is enough. Okay, for the next step, this is enough. You're ticking all of the necessary boxes. I've seen so many people who have joined ethics committees, for example, and they've just stayed on those committees for years because they feel that when they need to come to that progression board or that progression meeting, that they need to be on those committees at the time. In some institutions that might be the case, but in other institutions it might not be. In other institutions you might need maybe 6 or 12 months experience, and that's almost enough for you to kind of tick that box. Whereas other universities, actually, when you are ramping up to that promotion pathway, they want to see that you're actively engaged. So it's little things like that. It's the little kind of clarity in terms of what do you need at that particular institution at that particular time, looking for that particular promotion. And I think if that's hidden behind a veil, it can almost be quite impossible for you to be able to navigate that situation.
Yeah, and I think about some of the kind of nuances of the different processes. So I think particularly around kind of associate professorship, that is a designation in higher education that shows that you are established in your role. You're established as a scholar in your area. In the States, that means you have tenure, which is essentially a job for life because you've established yourself in that particular area as a leading researcher, as a leading person. In the UK, there are some universities where it's not just the case that you have to, throughout your career, accumulate this evidence. When you come to apply for promotion, you can use evidence within a very specific time frame. So when I was applying, for example, I could only use evidence from within the last 5 years. So that is, I mean, for me, I've only been in the job for 6 or 7 years. So it wasn't too much of an issue. But if you think about people who are going into the kind of middle stages of their career, if they've been building up evidence over the course of 10 or 15 years, if they then need to only draw on that last 5 years of experience, it might be that you need to be a little bit more strategic, I guess, in terms of where you get your experience, how long you keep doing that experience, but also thinking ahead. So if you want to apply for a promotion in 2 years' time, what is going to potentially come off your application at that point, and how can you start to supplement some of that to make sure that your application is as rounded as it can be? It's a really important kind of trick, I think, in terms of making sure that everything that you need falls into that eligibility window.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's really important. One thing that I've been working with some coachees on in the past is that promotion pathway. And one of the kind of hints and tips that I have that I don't mind sharing with you guys is that instead of just looking towards the next promotion, look for maybe 2 promotions in the future. So if you are a early career academic, don't just be looking at that senior lectureship, but also be looking at that associate prof role. Because if you're doing that, what that allows you to do is then say, okay, so in addition to the senior lectureship activities, these are the additional things that I need to be building into that application. And what that means is that if you are kind of headstrong, you're looking at that senior, if you're looking at that senior lectureship, and another opportunity comes along that perhaps can be useful for the future, it's not something that you instantaneously dismiss, or it's not something that you engage in but don't push it to the maximum and get exactly what you need from. Because all these stories, all of these experiences really do build into your portfolio. But if you're not being guided in terms of, and this goes back to the need for appropriate mentorship, if you're not being guided as to how best to use these experiences, how best to frame these experiences, and also what you need to take from each of those experiences, then ultimately you could have 2 people going for the same job role, both have very similar portfolios, but just because one person has been mentored into how to turn that into a story, which is something that both you and I, Craig, are very kind of keen on, that storytelling. If you can't tell the right story at the right time, then ultimately it's going to favor one party over the next.